Okay, perfect. We got that going. And all right, I think we're all set. Just letting a couple of people into the room. Okay, here we go. So, good morning, everybody. Today we continue on with the book of Vayikra, and we are in the third portion of Vayikra, namely the portion of Shemini, the third Torah portion in the book of Vayikra. And as mentioned before, the book of Vayikra, on the face of it, is really replete with all types of instructions regarding offerings, the temple, the different sin offerings, and the different elements of creating the temple and maintaining the temple and organizing the temple. And today we open up with the book of, or rather the parsha of Shemini. Shemini means the eighth. And essentially what today's Torah portion is about is the description of the conclusion of the preparation to create the temple. So that last week's Torah portion and from the book of Vayikra, we have all these instructions to create the temple or the services that were going to be offered in the temple. And indeed, if we go back even more, we go back to the book of Shemot, we know we spent a very long time, 5 parshiot, that discussed all the elements of the temple or the Mishkan. And that was the last half of the book of Shemot. Now we enter into the book of Vayikra, and the book of Vayikra is full of this call, the call to create a space and to make these offerings and the descriptions of the offerings and the descriptions of the clothing. And what was happening in the previous parshiot, in the previous Torah portions, up to our portion today, the book in the Torah portion of Shemini, was that Aaron, under the direction of Moses, but really led by Moses, was involved in the inauguration of the temple, so that for 7 days, Moshe was tutoring Aaron and his sons on how to erect the temple, because it was a complex system of organizing the erection of the temple, and then to dismantle the temple. Because, as we know, when the Jewish people traveled in the desert, sometimes they were camping for a short amount of time. Sometimes they were camping for one night. Sometimes they were there for a couple of weeks, a couple of months. Sometimes they were there for a couple of years. The longest stationary period that the Jewish people had when they were traveling from Egypt to the land of Israel as a result of the golden calf and the derailment and the lack of divine revelation in getting them to the land of Israel, was that they were actually, the longest encampment that they had was 19 years. But beyond those one encampment of 19 years, the Jewish people were sometimes going to a place for a month, 2 months, 3 months, and they had to be quite proficient in being able to assemble and erect the temple and also to dismantle it. And there was a tremendous amount of rules and regulations regarding the erection of the temple and the dismantlement of the temple. For example, just one example that we will learn in the book of Bamidbar, in the next book over, was that there were different families in the Levite family, and each family had a specific responsibility. There were 3 families: the Gershon family, the Kahat family, and the Merari family. And each family had a specific responsibility. For example, the Kahat family, their responsibility was that they covered all the vessels of the temple, because the vessels of the temple were not allowed to be treated as mundane moving objects, and they were not allowed to be seen outside of the temple uncovered, so that they were covered in the same vein that we cover the Aron HaKodesh in a synagogue today. The Sefer Torah is always covered. The Sefer Torah is covered is covered doubly. It is a cover within a cover. So the Sefer Torah goes into a Aron HaKodesh. It goes into the Holy Ark. The Holy Ark has its box, and that also is covered with a curtain, as you would see in any synagogue. And then the Sefer Torah itself has a mantle, and that mantle is only removed when the Sefer Torah is read from. So in the same vein, there was a whole specific amount of regulations regarding the dismantling and the erection of the temple. And so Aaron and his sons, under the tutelage of Moses, were being taught how to erect and dismantle the temple for 7 days. So they had a trial run, as they call it, a run-through practice, spring training, you give it the name that you want. They had a trial run wherein they, every single day, they organized themselves as if they were going to prepare the offerings. They learned about each offering. And then at the end of the day, they put it back together, they put it away, and they repeated this for 7 days. And then it came to the 8th day. And the 8th day is the opening words of this week's Torah portion. Vayhi bayom hashmini. And it was on the 8th day. And that becomes the name of our Torah portion. The name of our Torah portion is, and the name of the Torah portion is literally Shemini. Shemini means the 8th. And it comes from this verse, Vayhi bayom hashmini, and it was on the 8th day. So 8 becomes the name of the Torah portion. That's the name of our Torah portion. And so the question that is asked, and we're going to get into the text shortly, the question that is asked whenever we have a name that starts to become associated with a Torah portion, we ask the question, why is it that this specific word, why is it that this specific name becomes part and parcel of the Torah portion, associated with the Torah portion? Why not any other name? Like, for example, the first word of this Torah portion is Vayihi, and it was. So why not call this Torah portion Vayihi? So we see that every Torah portion, throughout the generations of Jewish practice, a name becomes associated with that Torah portion. Now remember that in the Torah scroll, there is no name. In a Torah scroll, all you see is text. And what delineates the idea that a new Torah portion is forming is the space that is part of the tradition that we leave in the Torah portion. So that you would talk about, let's say, a double paragraph, a double space. A double space in the Torah portion, when there is a space, that makes it a new Torah portion. But why a Torah portion has a specific name is part of the tradition on how we refer to that Torah portion. So the Torah portion this week is called Shemini, 8. And it derives from the verse, Vayhi bayom hashmini, and it was on the 8th day. And it follows, really, the idea that there were 7 days that preceded this 8th day. And those 7 days were 7 days of preparation. And so we're going to delve into the notion of the name of the Torah portion, as many commentators talk about the importance of the Torah portion, the name of the Torah portion relating to the essence of the Torah portion. So let's get into first, before we get into the name of the Torah portion and into the text of the Torah portion, let me share with you just a very brief overview of what actually happens in this week's Torah portion, besides the fact that it is the 8th day, and it is on this 8th day that the preparation for the offerings and the practice run is finished, and it is really the first day of the service. So we begin with the notion of the 8th day. After we're told that this is the following the 7th day of inauguration, that Aaron and his sons begin to officiate as Kohanim, and there's a fire that comes down and consumes the offerings, and the divine presence is felt in the sanctuary. And then we have a very tragic story that follows this. And the tragic story is the well-known story that Aaron had 2 sons. And his two sons were Nadav and Avihu. He had four sons, Nadav and Avihu, Elazar and Itamar. But his two sons, Nadav and Avihu, decide to offer their own offering, unbidden, unrequested, out of the ordinary and out of the protocol. They decide to offer their own offering that the Torah calls Eish Zara, a strange offering, because they were not commanded to offer this. And suddenly they die. The fire consumes them and they die. Aaron is silent, and then there is some teachings regarding the offerings. And following this tragedy, we suddenly have the laws of kosher, specifically the laws of kosher animals and species that were permitted. So we're taught that we're only allowed to eat animals that have split hooves and who chew their cud. So most domesticated animals. That fish have to have fins and scales that fall off very easily. And then we're told that most birds are kosher, except for a list of predatory birds that we're not allowed to eat. And then there are a couple of kosher insects, locusts, that are kosher, and the rest we're not allowed to eat. That's the second part of the book or the parsha of Shemini. And finally, Shemini concludes with the idea of a mikveh, that a mikveh is a place that you derive ritual purity, and the Jewish people are commanded to be sensitive to the idea of purity or impurity, very poor translations of the words of Tuma and Tahara. That is, in a nutshell, the Torah portion of Shemini. And all these elements of Shemini are tied in to the name of Shemini. So let's get into the text itself, and let's find the opening verse. Here we go. Let's find the opening verse, and here we go. So, as we see, this is the Torah reading for Shemini. This is the name of the Torah portion. And the verse opens up, Vayihi bayom hashemini, and it was in the 8th day, Kara Moshe la'Aaron u'levanav, that Moshe calls Aaron and his sons, u'leziknei Yisrael, and to the elders of Israel. And what does he tell them? He gives them the injunction to bring the shlamim. He gives them the different types of offerings. Vayomer el Aaron kach lecha egel ben bakar lechatas. Rather, the chatas and the shlamim. So he says, you bring the ram as a burnt offering for sin, and the ram as a complete offering, and you bring it before God. And it talks about the different offerings that they bring rather. So they have the goat as a sin offering, and then the calf and the lamb as a burnt offering. And again, these are all the different distinctions of the offerings that were brought on the first day. And the question that is asked, that Rashi himself asks, but Rashi answers in a more succinct way, is why is this day called the 8th day? It's true that there were 7 days of inauguration. However, the 8th day was not just the 8th day, it was really the first day. So for example, the 8th day was not the 8th day of practice. So let me just unpack this for you. If you are practicing for 7 days, let's say you have a play, you're part of a drama troupe, and you're practicing for 7 days. And on the 8th day is opening night for your play. Do you call opening night the 8th day? If you have a restaurant and you're doing a dry run, and finally you have opening night, do you call the dry run the 8th day of the dry run, or you call it the first day of the opening? And especially here, that the first day of the opening was a monumental day. It was the first time in the history of the Jewish people that they had a Mishkan, that they had a tabernacle. It was the first time they offered offerings in that tabernacle. It was, in addition to that, our sages tell us that it was Rosh Chodesh Nisan, which is ironic that we're almost by Rosh Chodesh Nisan, we're 1 week away. Rosh Chodesh Nisan, it was the first day of Nisan, which is called, what is Nisan called in the Torah? Nisan is called the first month of the year. Even though today we observe Rosh Hashanah in Tishrei, but the Torah calls Tishrei the 7th month. Nisan, however, is seen as the first month of the year. Biblically speaking, Nisan is the first month of the year. So we have the first month of the year. We have the first day of the first month of the year. We have the first day of opening. We have the first time the Mishkan is used. We have the first time there is offerings brought within the context of the Mishkan. Today, that we are reading about in the Torah, the day that is called the 8th day, is really the first day, because it is only the first day of all the actual practice in the Mishkan, the actual service in the Mishkan. Everything before that was just a trial run. So it's interesting that the Torah calls this day the 8th day as opposed to the first day. It should be called the first day. It's the opening day. Opening day is the first day, not the 8th day. And so Rashi notes this anomaly as well. As we said many times, Rashi says about himself, Eini basi, ela lefarish pshuta shel mikra. I have come only to teach the simple meaning of the text. Rashi sees the anomaly as well. So Rashi will answer the anomaly with his own interpretation, which is a practical interpretation. But of course, the mystics and the teachers of the Torah will take this idea and they'll dive down into it, because logically, it really does not make sense that you call the opening day the 8th day. It's almost like an insult. 7 days of practice, and the opening day you call the 8th day of practice. That means you learned nothing from your practice. There's no achievement. You haven't gone to the next level, as it were. So let's see what Rashi says about this. So Rashi, in Pasuk Aleph, the first Pasuk of Parsha Shemini, will opine on this. Rashi will say, okay, just let someone in here. Rashi says, let's look at Rashi's commentary. Vayhi bayom hashmini, and it was on the 8th day. Rashi is troubled by the fact that this is called the 8th day, because indeed it was the first day. And Rashi explains, Vayhi bayom hashmini, what was it? The 8th of Lamiluim of the practice of the trial run. It was the 8th day of the practice. And then Rashi explains, Hu Rosh Chodesh Nisan. It was the first day of the month of Nisan. Nisan, of course, being the first of the months. Shahukam HaMishkan Bo Bayom. That this was the day that the Mishkan was finally erected permanently. And Rashi says that it was such a day of distinction. It was such a day of distinction that this day received 10 crowns. The Natal Esther Ataras Hashnuyas Beseder Olam, and this day took 10 crowns of distinction. So imagine that you're talking about first. You're talking about milestones. You're talking about the first time something happens. This is on the first day of the month of Nisan. And you could say, why is it that Rashi is actually explaining us that it was the 8th day of the investors? Rashi is troubled by why it's called the 8th day when it's the first day. And Rashi explains us that actually it was the first day of the Mishkan, and there were 10 milestones, 10 crowns of distinction, which are enumerated in the Medrash about the great achievements of that day. So the question is then, Rashi is actually strengthening the question even more, and Rashi is actually underscoring the question even more, which is, if it was the first day and it was the day that 10 milestones were achieved, why is it called the eighth day? The fact that Rashi has to explain to us that this is the eighth day, there is an added dimension of asking then, why indeed was it called the eighth day? So there's a teaching that there's a verse in Tehillim, there's a chapter in Tehillim that was sung, as it were, on this day. And let me just pull that Tehillim up. That there was a song that King David himself wrote for the eighth day, for this eighth day, in honor of this eighth day. And we see that in general, there are some psalms that King David writes, and he calls them a psalm dedicated to the eighth day. And our sages tell us what is a dedication to the eighth day? It is this eighth day of the temple. So if we look at the Tehillim, where King David dedicates a song to the eighth day, let's see what Rashi says over there. So Rashi says here, this is Psalm chapter 12. And it begins with the words, Lamatseach al Hashminis Mizmar LeDavid, for the conductor on the eighth day, a song for David. And Rashi asks the question, why is it called the eighth day? And Rashi says, because the eighth day had Kinor Shel Shmonim Nimin. It was King David sang on an eighth string harp. And an eighth string harp, today, harps are not made with 8 strings, but an 8 string harp would look like something like this. Let me just find it. I looked it up, an 8 string harp. So an 8 string harp would look like, let me just share this. An 8 string harp would look like something like this. Let me just move this so people can see. Can you see the application? Or is it blocked? There, you can see it. So you have an 8 string harp, which is here, you see the 8 strings. This was an ancient harp. So Rashi says the reason why King David calls it the eighth Lamasech Mizmar Hashminis, because he had an 8 string harp. The question is then, why did he have an 8 string harp, and what is the meaning of 8 strings? However, the mystics tell us that there is something to be said about 8, and that is this: that if you take the number 8, right, and you analyze it, you'll see that the number 8 in Judaism is considered to be outside the realm of the regular. All Jewish ritual and all Jewish practice is predicated around a normative cycle of 7. And we've discussed this many times. We have the 7 days of creation. That's a normative cycle. We have the 7 days of a wedding, the 7 days of celebration of a bride and groom. We have, unfortunately, the 7 days of Shiva. We have 7 days are considered to be the cycle of life, the cycle of nature. So in Judaism, 7 is a normative cycle. Even the Brit Milah is first 7 days of nature, 7 days of full week, and then added by 1 more day. So in Judaism, the number 7 is seen as anything that is cyclical, anything that is within a repetitive, predictive idea. Because being anything that is cyclical means that it comes around, and it comes around again, and it comes around again. And so when God created the world, he could have created the world in 8 days. The fact that God decides to divide the creation, as it were, into 6 days and 7 days of creation, denotes that within the realm of nature, 7 is the number. And 8 is a number that represents outside of nature, as we discussed this many times. And in fact, if you take an 8 and you lay it on its side, you have the symbol for infinity. So that the fact that Aaron and his sons were instructed for 7 days to organize the dedication of the temple, that the trial run did not last for 10 days, did not last for 8 days or 10 days or 12 days. It lasted for 7 days. So that within 7, there was that loop, that repetitive loop. And the 8th day is the day that surpasses that. So we see that 8 takes you out of the bounds of nature. And so there's something magical, as it were, that happens with the 8th day. The 8th day is when you overcome, that you pass the benchmark. So that being said, why is it that at the end of the day, if the 8th day is outside the realm of nature, why is it nevertheless that we talk about the 7 days of the Miluim, we talk about the 7 days of preparation, and we attach the 8th day to the 7th? If we would have started a new cycle, so that we would say the opening day of the Mishkan, the day of inauguration, was today, we will be detaching the 7 days of practice from the opening day. Even though 8 seems to be out of place because it really is not part of the cycle. And yes, it means that they've reached a point where they get past, they got past the cycle of practice and they're reaching something higher. So we find that, let's say, the 8th day would be the day of the Brit Milah, the 8 nights of Hanukkah. We have Shemini Atzeres is on the 8th day. 8 means like you're transcending, and 8 does signify transcendence. All that being true, nevertheless, why is it that when we talk about the erection of the Mishkan, we tie the opening day of the service of the Mishkan to the practice? Most people, logically, if you would think about any event that you practice for, and then you have your opening day, you have your opening night, whatever it is, if it's an art show, if it's a play, if it's a restaurant, whatever it is that you're opening up the first night, you would not think that there would be a connection. You would not make the connection between the 7 days of practice and call it, it was on the 8th day of practice that we opened up that. It doesn't seem to be logical to say that it was on the 8th day of practice that we opened up the temple. It seems to be diminishing the day of opening to say that it is on the 8th day of practice. Even though it's true that in Judaism, 8 represents transcendence, 8 represents infinity, 8 represents reaching above and beyond what you could do within nature. It's true. And those are definitely the elements of why this day was called the 8th day. But on a more practical level, on a more pshat level, on a more simple level, on a less mystical level, the question still begs to be asked. Why is it that you're calling your opening night the 8th day? It's almost like you're attaching the practice, the ritual of practice, the order of the practice to the opening night. That you're not separating the 7 days of practice with the 8th day. In a normal fashion, even if you practice for 7 days, once you've finished the practice, you're opening up a new chapter. And that new chapter is a brand new day. It's the first day of the month of Nisan. It's the first day of the first month of the year. It's the first day of the Mishkan. It's opening day. And yet, opening day in the Mishkan is called the 8th day of practice. So here, what we're starting to see is that beyond the mystical teachings of what the number 8 means, there's another lesson that can be learned about the 8th day of practice. Why would you call the first night, the opening night, the 8th day of practice? And so I would like to dive down in a more practical level, so less mystical, but more practical. What is the message that is being taught to us by the fact that opening night is called 8th day? beyond the mystical meaning of the number 8, there's something else that the Torah is telling us, which is that there is an inherent connection to the ritual practice to the opening night. And what is it? Right after we're told about the opening day, we come across the unfortunate incident of Nadav and Avihu. So let's get into the incident of Nadav and Avihu, the two sons of Aaron that die in a very strange way because they brought a strange fire to God. And I want to just get into that little tragic episode and connect this to this idea of the 8th day. So I'm just going to share this screen with you. So we get into the story of Nadav and Avihu. Here is the story of Nadav and Avihu. So this is the third section, the third portion of Leviticus. It is in chapter 10, and verse 1. And here we have the tragic story of Nadav and Avihu. The Torah tells us, Vayikhu b'nei Aharon Nadav Avihu. The sons of Aaron, Nadav and Avihu, took Ish Machtasai. They each took their pan, Vayitnu bahen Eish, and they put a fire in it. Vayisimu aleha ketairis, and they placed incense into it. So they wanted to bring their own offering. So far, so good, right? So far, so good. Vayikrivu lifnei Hashem, and they brought it before God. However, what do we see here? The Torah calls this Eish Zara, a foreign fire. Okay? Asher lo tziva otam, which he had not commanded them. So they bring a foreign fire that God did not command them. Vateitze Eish milfnei Hashem, and a fire went forth before God, vatochal otam, and consumes them. Vayamusu lifnei Hashem, and they died before God. And then God says, and then Moshe says to Aaron, Hu asher diber Hashem, this is what God told me, Lamar, to say, Vikrovai ekdash, I will be sanctified by those near to me, Va'apnei kol adam echbad, and through all people I will be glorified, Vayidam Aaron, and Aaron was silent. So this is a very strange story. You have an excitement. It's the first day of inauguration. Aaron's sons, who are both Kohanim by virtue of the fact that their father's a Kohen, they get into it and they decide to bring an offering. Problem, the offering was not commanded. The offering was on their own accord. And suddenly the Torah calls their offering Eish Zara, a foreign fire. Vatochal, and they are consumed. What happened here? We're talking about the sons of Aaron. We're talking about two righteous people who wanted one thing. They wanted to participate. And they wanted to participate in their own way. And they bring this incense. They go, oh yeah, let's do it too. And suddenly the fire burns them. They die in this terrible tragedy. And the question is why? What happened here? Why did the service of Aaron's sons conclude in such a tragic fashion? Why wasn't the scene as a beautiful part of a spontaneous offering? What went wrong here? So there's many, many interpretations on the story of Aaron and his sons. Why did Nadav and Avihu die? So there are many explanations. Some say they were drunk, so they were not capable of bringing the offering. Some say that they were high on some kind of incense, not capable to bring the offering, and therefore they were not in their right mind when they brought the offering. Some say that their souls expired. The mystics say that they didn't die because a fire came down and consumed them, but rather they were so excited to be part of this ritual that their bodies couldn't handle it. They had an out of body experience, and they died out of just like in some kind of spiritual encounter that they had euphoria. that they died in euphoria, that they were like in this space of like a euphoric moment. It was too much for them to handle, and they died. So there's all these interpretations of why they died. But the question is this. We have in this Torah portion, we have the story of the inauguration. Immediately following the inauguration, we have the story of Aaron and his sons dying. And immediately following the Aaron and his sons dying, we have the laws of kashrut. We have the laws of the kosher animal. And the question begs to be asked, what's the connection between the eighth day, between Aaron's sons dying and the laws of kosher? And what we're going to see here, let me just see where this ends. Immediately following this terrible tragedy, Moses tells Aaron a law that is spoken to God. Okay, Vaydaber Hashem al Aaron. God spoke to Aaron and he said, "Do not drink wine that will lead to intoxication, neither you nor your sons with you when you go to the tent of meeting, so that you should not die." So, what does this sound to you like? This verse. What does it sound to you?
That they were drunk.
It sounds to us that, and let's just pull out Rashi's commentary. It sounds to us that somehow they were drunk, and that is what caused their death. Okay, this is definitely one of the interpretations of the laws that are found here. Okay, don't get drunk, because you could die, because something will happen to you, or you will get involved in something that is not okay. So, for example, Rashi says here, Rashi comes to teach us. He says, "Ulahorat et bnei Yisrael's kol hachukim," and to instruct the children of Israel regarding all the statutes. Rashi says, "Lahorat," to instruct, limed, to teach you, she'asor tzikor b'hira, that a person is not allowed to be intoxicated when they render halachic decisions. Okay, and he says, Yachal, you could think, Yehe chayev misa, that this is a death incurring penalty. Talmud Laimar, the Torah is teaching us, Ato vanecha itach v'loite musu, you and your children with you, so you shall not die. And Rashi concludes, Kohanim ba'avodas samamisa ve'ein chachamim b'hirei samamisa, that this applies that only intoxicated Kohanim in their service can incur the death penalty, where intoxicated sages who render halachic decisions do not incur the death penalty. So here, Rashi is teaching us that we're learning an additional teaching, which is that a rabbi cannot judge the halacha when he is under the influence of alcohol. You're not allowed to drive under the influence of alcohol. You're not allowed to render halacha. And indeed, there are many acts that the Torah prohibits to be done under the influence of halacha. For example, a man and a woman are not allowed to engage in intimacy if they are under the influence of alcohol, if they are drunk, if they're buzzed, slightly buzzed, it's questionable. But certainly, Torah prefers that when you do things of meaning, that you should be completely present. You should not be intoxicated. You should not be under the influence of alcohol. The Torah allows for alcohol. We're not like the Muslims that prohibit alcohol. Torah allows for alcohol. Indeed, we know that every part of the ritual of Jewish life is associated with drinking of wine. Under the chuppah, we drink wine. Friday night, we sanctify Shabbos with the drinking of wine. At the Brit Milah, we drink wine. At the Sheva Brachot, we drink wine. To be a Jew you need to have wine. To be a Jew, to participate fully in the many parts of our liturgy and our tradition, is to be able to consecrate with wine. But drinking a glass of wine is not intoxication. The Torah tells us, the Talmud tells us, the yain yismach levav enosh, that the wine makes a person, it gladdens their heart. A little bit of wine is good for you. But intoxication is a different game, and we're allowed to get intoxicated. In fact, we're told that on Purim, we're supposed to get a little intoxicated. We're not supposed to know the difference between blessed is Mordechai and cursed is Haman. That's how we're supposed to drink on Purim. So Torah allows for intoxication, and it certainly does not prohibit alcohol. But it says when there are certain things that you're going to do, you need a mindfulness to it. And that is the mindfulness that is required when a Kohen is bringing an offering. He has to be completely sober. And that is true when a rabbi is discerning halacha, can't be under the influence, he can't be buzzed, he has to have a clear head. And that is also true within a relationship, a man and a wife, when they're engaged in intimacy, the intimacy has to be first with their mind. Their mind has to connect before their bodies connect. It cannot be just a lustful orgy. And so we see that there is room for inebriation, but at the end of the day, it cannot be chaotic. There has to be there's rules for everything. And so what we have here is following this injunction of not drinking wine when you're performing the service, not being intoxicated, the Torah tells us, when you're performing the service. You cannot be intoxicated, which implies that Nadav and Avihu were intoxicated. But that's not the only reason that's not the only interpretation that's given. It's just implied from the verse. So you're not allowed to be intoxicated when you perform the service. You're not allowed to be intoxicated when you're rendering halacha. And we know that there are many things in Jewish life that if a person is doing this under the influence of alcohol, it is considered to be not done properly. So there is a need for a sober time, and there's a need, there's a permission to be in a state of chaos. So really, the intoxication of Aaron and his sons does not necessarily need to mean a physical intoxication that they were drunk, even though that's what it's implied, but rather the intoxication represents a certain state of chaos. Aaron's two sons, Nadav and Avihu, their error was not necessarily that they drank or that they were intoxicated, even though that is clearly prohibited. But it points to a larger problem in their service, which was their service came from a place of chaos. What was the chaos? What was the chaos coming from? Where was their state of mind coming from? Why were they in a state of chaos? A state of chaos does not necessarily mean that it's wild and it's negative. A state of chaos could be something that is a precursor to growth. So, for example, we know that for anything to grow, a seed that has to be planted into the ground, before the seed is planted into the ground, the seed is whole. The seed is linear. There's an order to the seed. And then when the seed is planted into the ground, the seed has to kind of break down, it has to dissolve, and there has to be some type of chaos going on there for plant to emerge. And we know that even the creation of the world, the very creation of the world was first that was first sorry that was first started with chaos. The Torah tells us in Bereshit that the world was tahu vavavu, that it was empty and chaotic, that there was both emptiness and chaos, that the precursor of the universe, before this world came to being, there was chaos. Everything was mixed up. The gases were mixed up. The fluids were mixed up. Everything was mishkababel, as we say. There was a chaos. We know that any artistic rendering, any creative form of expression usually is preceded by chaos. A person is in a state. Sometimes an artist may be in a state of funk, a depression, not knowing their words, being lost with something. And suddenly, out of that state of confusion or emotion that cannot be articulated, comes a song, comes a piece of music, comes a piece of art. We know sometimes that the greatest music comes from the most tortured artists, that they may be in a state of chaos before the music emerges. It's true for artists as well. All types of creativity is usually preceded by chaos. Chaos in of itself is not necessarily a negative. There is room for chaos in this universe. Chaos is the unbridled, unformed, unexpressed emotion, passion, creative juices, vitality. Chaos is everything before order. Order, we know, in and of itself, has no life. Chaos is full of potential life, but it has no order. And so chaos in of itself is not necessarily a negative, because it is the chaos that brings to the order. And it is the chaos that gives the color to the order. The language, the poetry. There has to be first a mishkababel before there's an order. And so we can start, perhaps, to venerate chaos, because chaos represents the energy, the emotion, the passion, the excitement, the sincerity even in something. And so Aaron's sons, when they came into the temple, they were in a state of spiritual chaos. Spiritual chaos means I just have a tremendous passion, a feeling I desire, I want closeness, I want connection. And what happened to them was they did not translate that sense of chaos into order. In other words, they did not follow the rule, and it backfired and it destroyed them. And so when we talk about the fact that this Torah portion is called Shemini, that the name of the Torah portion is called Shemini, it's called the eighth day, it's not just to tell us about that the achievement of the erection of the temple brought the temple into the infinite or the above nature, which it is, above nature and superseding nature and transcendence. Those are all true. But it also is telling us something so important. Understand that the eighth day could only come to this universe through 7 days of boring practice, through 7 days of rites, through 7 days of ritual, through 7 days of a clear order. So that in Judaism, although it says that God desires our hearts, and that our passion, our kavanah, our intention is very important in the service of God, yet it cannot precede the actual order of how we do things. And that's what we have, halacha. There is a rhyme and there's a reason, there's an order. And often people say, but I don't feel the halacha. I want to do it my way. Or, for example, we have the prayer services. The prayer services are an ordained ritual of book, which tells us sing this song with these words at this time. But what if I want to just say whatever I want? You could. But when you come to shul, this is how you daven shachris. And this is when you daven shachris. And this is how you take up the Torah. And you cannot just change it because your passion tells you otherwise. So the fact that we have the laws of kosher, which if you look at the laws of kosher, they're very linear. They're very ordered. This is what you can eat. An animal that has split hooves and chews its cud. If an animal chews its cud and doesn't have split hooves, it's not kosher. If an animal has split hooves but doesn't chew its cud, it's not kosher. If a fish has fins and scales, it is kosher. If it has fins and no scales, it's not kosher. If it has scales and no fins, it's not kosher. These are the birds you're allowed to eat. These are the birds you're not allowed to eat, rather. The other birds you can eat. This is a very clear, demarked way of performing a spiritual life. And the question that could be asked is, this doesn't sound like spirituality. And that's one of the accusations that some people make against Judaism. It's tradition. This is how we do it. This is halakha. This is the order. What about my feelings? You can bring your feelings. You can bring your passion. You can bring even the chaos, that the unbridled expression, but it has to first First, the order is 7 days of practice. And only in that form of the 7 days of practice do you put the eighth, do you put the chaos and the expression and the passion, because the Torah tells us that even when it comes to something so divine, like communicating with God, like having an experience where you feel that you're in service to God, even there, the Torah is not calling the opening day of the Mishkan opening day. It's not separating it from the 7 days of ritual, but rather it attaches itself. The name, the day of inauguration, is completely attached to the 7 days of order, to the 7 days of ritual, to the 7 days of specific way of doing it. And it's not an accident that this Torah portion is called the 8th day. It's not an accident that the day of inauguration is not called day 1 or opening day or inauguration day, but it is called the 8th day of practice, because it reminds us that in as much as our expression to the divine, our wanting to have a spiritual encounter is important, it always has to be preceded and predicated on the structure with which we do it. And going it alone and doing it our own way can be quite dangerous. And that's why right after we're told that this is the 8th day, that this is the 8th day of practice, we're told that the sons of Aaron decide out of the goodness of their heart. The sages say they were great rabbi, they were great spiritualists, they were extremely spiritual. They wanted to have that spiritual experience. They brought an offering on their own accord. But the Torah says, what is this offering? It's Eish Zara. It's foreign. It was out of place. And therefore, it could not reach its desired goal, and they expired from it. And so sometimes the passion that we may have, even for within Judaism, can eat us up if we do not follow form and ritual. And sometimes it is the form and ritual that actually gets us through the challenges of faith. That we don't always feel it, you see. We don't always feel connected to the Torah. We don't always feel connected to God. We don't always feel connected to the spiritual experience. And if we will just allow that spiritual experience to be predicated on our feelings of the day, then sometimes we will and sometimes we won't. And also when we will, we may do it completely wrong. I feel like I want to do this, and therefore I'm going to take liberty with halacha because I find halacha is right now restricting me. I don't want the halacha right now. I think that the halacha doesn't speak to my soul at this moment. Don't we know this? Don't we know this in the movements of Jewish life? That's decided that certain parts of Judaism are going to be expunged because they're too constricted. And yet history tells us that those movements that veered away from the formula of halacha do not endure. Their Judaism does not endure. You know, a few weeks ago in the Academy Awards, there was an actor that came out and he disassociated himself, or it was controversial. Regardless, he criticized the Jewish people and said he was like ashamed to be part of the Jewish people. He disassociated himself from the Jewish people. And I remember watching his speech. I wanted to understand it. Where is this coming from? What is the roots of this type of complete disassociation with the Jewish people at a time that they're in trouble? And I recognized something, that the Judaism that he received, the director of the Holocaust movie, right? Add more pain to the story. The education that he received of what it meant to be a Jew did not include halacha. It did not include Shabbat. You know, there's a great movement now to remember the Holocaust. And indeed, you know, last week we said that we went to shul 2 weeks ago, a week and a half ago, Parshat Zachor, where we remember Amalek. And it's part of the Sheish Zachoriot. It's part of the 6 remembrances that we have as Jews to remember Amalek. And yet, no one asks about the other remembrances. It's true that as Jews, we must always remember what the enemies of the Jewish people did to us. We remember the Holocaust. We remember Amalek. We have an injunction of Zachor. We do. To be a Jew is to remember our history. We don't forget our history. And that gives us a sense of continuity and a vision for the future. But part of the Sheish Zachoriot, lesser known, is Zachor et Yom Shabbat L'Kacho. Remember Shabbat and keep it holy. We cannot divorce Jewish identity, Jewish passion, Jewish, Jewish, Jewish involvement from the order, from the halacha, from the 7 days of preparation, from the rules and the rituals. It's not enough to say I'm bringing an offering to God. I'm going to express myself as a Jew from my own understanding. That's what Nadav and Avihu did in good faith. They did it in good faith. They were not wrong in their desire. They wanted to be close to God. Their intention was 100% pure, and yet it was not enough because there was a way to do it, and they did it outside of that way, and it ended up destroying them. And the lesson for that is this: the reason why this Torah portion, one of the many reasons, I should say, because we can discuss this Torah portion, as we said, we learn all of Torah on the level of pardes, shat, remez, drush, and sod. The simple, the analogy, the deeper meaning, and of course the mystical meaning. But when we come to a Torah portion, and the Torah says, don't call this day one, don't call this opening day, don't call this inaugural day, don't call this opening night, call it day 8 of practice. It's telling us something so important for our life as Jewish people, that as Jews, we cannot divorce our practice, which is maybe not the most exciting part of being Jewish, our practice and our following of halacha, and of the order, from being complete Jews. And in as much as chaos and the excitement and the passion to want to connect to what does it mean to be a Jew should be there, if left to your own devices, you can have a guy who is a director of an Academy Award Holocaust movie, which is supposed to remember what happened to the Jewish people, come and use that as a repudiation of victims of October 7th. And that's something that, how does that bridge happen? How do you cross such a huge abyss to come and fall to such a degree? And it's troubled Jews all over the world. So this week's Torah portion is telling us this. How? It's when you stop connecting your life to the halacha. Because to be a Jew cannot just be about your feelings of what it means to be a Jew. Cannot only be about your love for Judaism, or your love for others, or your sense of tzedakah or compassion, which is definitely hallmarks of Jewish life. But it also has to be trained into a system. The system is halacha. And we see that any movement that diverts itself away from halacha ends up becoming lost to the Jewish people. And those who adhere to it end up being lost from the Jewish people. So in as much as halacha seems to be something trite and something that we sometimes understand, why can't I just turn on light of Shabbos? Why can't I just do whatever it is? Sometimes these minutiae of halacha seem to be, does God really care? Does God really care if I turn on the light on Shabbos? Does it destroy his universe? Halacha is for us also. Halacha is there to keep us connected to the tradition. And this is the underlying message of the name of this week's Torah portion. It's not called inaugural day. It's called the 8th day of practice, because practice makes perfect in more than one way. It keeps you on the steady path. And that's why halacha is called halacha, to go. Halacha means to go. Halech. It's a path. And it is a path that keeps us connected to the divine will. And we can't underestimate it, even if we don't necessarily always agree with it, understand it, or connect with it emotionally. And we may feel that we want that just raw emotion, that chaos, to really be the path to connect to God. And while there is room for emotion, and there's room for passion, and there's room for even creativity within our service of God, it can never come at the expense of halacha. And that's the message of this week's Torah portion. And that's why the laws of kashrut are mentioned after the story of Aaron. And that's why the law of inebriation is mentioned as well, is because inebriation is, I feel like, and I want to go somewhere else. What does being drunk do to us? I'm in a state of, when you're drunk, you're excused for everything. I'm in a state of passion. I'm having an out of body experience. That's good for sometimes. It's good for a party. It's not good for when you're doing a mitzvah. It's not good for when you're keeping the Torah, because to continue the Jewish tradition, we always have to be mindful of the Shemini, that everything that we do has to be predicated on practice. And it's the least jazzy part of Judaism. But if we look historically, halacha, adherence to halacha, at least Shabbat, the big ones, Shabbat, kashrut, adherence to those elements of halacha is really what kept the Jewish people together, as is very well said by the famous saying that says, more than the Jewish people kept Shabbat, Shabbat has kept the Jewish people. And I would say, to paraphrase that, more than the Jewish people have kept halacha, halacha has kept the Jewish people. And that's something that we can't sneeze at. And that in as much as we may not always feel it, it's okay. It's okay. There's room for chaos. There's room for passion. There's room for my unbridled expression. And there's room sometimes just to follow the arrow and to follow the path. There's room for both. But one cannot come at the expense of the other. So more than the Jewish people have kept the halacha has kept the Jewish people. And that's one of the underlying message of the Torah portion of Shemini, that we have to have a huge respect for this system, because the system is what keeps us connected to God, believe it or not. So that's my takeaway from the Torah portion of Shemini. And of course, speaking to myself as much as I'm speaking to anyone else, because often the halacha is the boring part. Do this like this. Why? Because that's how we do it. But that pathway of holding on to the framework is what keeps us going, and therefore the name of the Torah portion is Shemini. It's called the eighth day of practice, because the practice has to precede the event, but the practice is also always intrinsically connected and never severed from the event itself. And the fact that Moses decides to use these words, that it was on the eighth day that the temple was inaugurated, not the first day of Nisan, not the first day of inauguration, is telling us that we can never sever the 7 days of rite and ritual from the passion and the expression and the excitement. So I wish everyone a blessed week.
Shavua Tov, thank you.
Shavua Tov, and we're now we're past Purim, we're getting close to Pesach, and our sages tell us that Shloshim Yom Lifnei Chag, 30 days before the holiday, we start already to learn the laws of Passover. It's a good time to read the laws of Passover, to remind ourselves of what we're supposed to do, what we're not allowed to do, because no matter how educated we are, we always have to review the laws. And that's something that we could do now as well, is just to go back, review what am I allowed to do, what I'm not allowed to do. This is the glue that keeps the Jewish people together, sticks the Jewish people to the Torah, and sticks the Torah to the Jewish people. It's nothing to sneeze at, even though it's form. So I wish everyone a blessed.
Have a good week. Thank you.